In September 1922, Bert and Mort Smith came to Port Adelaide. Mort Smith, who was then a salesman for Duncan and Fraser, was sent to the Port Adelaide district and realised the terrific potential of the Port Adelaide district. The terrific potential in Port Adelaide for the car business, but it could not be worked from Adelaide, as the Portonians were Portonians and they traded locally. So he put a proposition to Duncan's that we'd open up a distributorship for them on Model T in Port Adelaide. So Mort and Bert started. Bert had been with Duncan and Fraser's right through the workshop, and at that time was with the Studebaker people who were Bagot, Shakes and Lewis. I'll now refer to Mort and Bert Smith as we. We started a trade as Smith Brothers, but shortly took the name of Smith Motor Company. We bought land in Godfrey Street from Reed Brothers, the timber merchants, and built a garage. The first man to come into the place was Trevor Blythe, a well-known Port Adelaide identity and a thorough gentleman, and this is what he said. You two young fellas are starting business in Port Adelaide. Let me give you some advice. If you're honest and truthful, you'll succeed in Port Adelaide, but if you're not, you just as well not start. And this is what we tried to carry out from there on. This man remained a customer right till his death. The first Model T truck we delivered in Port Adelaide was to Reed Brothers, and the first motor car to Alf McClellan, who was manager of John A. Brown, the coal merchants. The present Chris McClellan is his nephew. Godfrey Street in those days was just mud, and we had to meet our clients in Commercial Road and pilot their cars along to the garage because they wouldn't risk driving through the mud and getting bogged. We must have put tons upon tons of ashes into this road till finally we had a surface that would carry the cars to our door. We both had an engineering background, as our grandfather was the founder of C.A. Smith & Co. Engineers in Adelaide, and our father carried on this business right until his death in 1916. We only had one employee at this time. He was only a little fella. His name was Bill Adams, and you all know him today as our service manager. He proved a very good apprentice, a splendid motor mechanic, and I can tell you a few things he used to do. Of a weekend, when make a few more pounds, he used to recondition Model T Ford engines. He'd start after he'd knocked off at midday Saturday, all out an engine, rebore it, thoroughly overhaul it, have it ready back on the road Monday morning. Not bad. Try that out. We sold Fords right on up till 1926, and then the Model T went off the market. We then sold Morris, Rugby, and finally settled on Hudson Essex, which we then sold until 1929, until the Depression hit the port. During the Model T Ford era, I may say that we sold these cars brand new for £155. Of course, there was no speedometer or shock absorbers, and we used to fit £50 worth of extras as an average in the way of wooden running boards, cathedral guards, rubber mats, shock absorbers, speedometers, spare wheel, spare tyre, etc. The Hudson Essex franchise proved to be particularly valuable. We sold no end of these vehicles, and in Christmas 1928 we sold as many as 8 or 10 in the last few days before Christmas. In 1927, Mr. Zerby, who was then manager of the paint company, walked into Mr. Mort Smith's office and said, "How much will it take for this place?" Mort mentioned a figure, and within 10 minutes Mr. Zerby came back with £1,000 deposit. So there we were, we had to get out. It was then that we bought a 50-foot frontage on Commercial Road. That is where our store and workshop is now. In 1929, 30, 31 was shocking Depression years, and nobody had any money or could get any work done. It was at this time that Mort got out of the business. He said he'd had the motor business and he was going to get out, and Bert carried on his own. So from now on I'll be saying I instead of we. During the Depression years, most cars were on blocks for the lack of funds to run them. Towards the end of these Depression years, I got the idea that if I bought these cars and reconditioned them, I would be doing something towards breaking the Depression. So I went round, bought these cars, Whippet Tourers, Chev Tourers, Rugby Tourers. Well, of course, not a lot of money involved, only about £25 each, and brought them into the workshop, had them reconditioned and sold them at a small profit. This, I think, was doing a little bit towards breaking the Depression. In 1932, I again took on the Ford. This time, Dalghetti's were the distributors. And we sold Fords from 1932 to 1935, when I changed over to General Motors. There was Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Buick. City Motors were then the distributors, and we worked with City Motors right through until after the Holden was built. It was during this period that I bought the extra 50-foot frontage on Commercial Road and built the showroom. That might be a bit misleading. I think it was about 1932 or 33 that I bought this extra property and built the showroom. During the Second World War, when there was no cars to be sold, we carried on under petrol rationing, parts rationing, everything else. And during this period we fitted, I should say, over 100 brig gas producers. Well, the servicing of these wasn't very clean work, and the handling of charcoal, well, it took 5 years to get the dust out of the place. And we had all sorts of restrictions on charcoal. Eric May can tell you something about this, how he used to come down here during the dark hours of morning and unload trucks because of road controls and one thing and another. But, charcoal, it's the dirtiest stuff I've ever seen. When our troops returned from the Middle East and their vehicles were unloaded in Port Adelaide, they had lost their workshop. It had been sunk on the way home from the Middle East. We turned our workshop over to recondition these AIF vehicles, and we put through 10 vehicles per day, every day. All through the Easter holidays we did this, and got these trucks on the move again. During the latter end of the war and early afterwards, we traded in used vehicles. Well, they were pretty hard to get, much easier to sell than to get. And I used to be out at 6 o'clock in the morning to buy vehicles. After 7 you could kiss them goodbye, all the good ones were gone. During this time, a lad had grown up. He won the Angus Engineering exhibition when he was 16, a Bachelor of Science degree at 18, honours degree at 19. He was man-powered at the age of 20 and sent to Deer Park and married him on for training, then out to Salisbury as a chemist on the petrol section, where he finished up in charge of a division. After the war, well, Salisbury was no longer needed, and I said to him, well, come down and try yourself out at Port Adelaide. He said, okay, I'll do that. If I'm no good, you tell me, and if I don't like it, I'll tell you. We've never discussed that since, and this chap is now your managing director. I'd like to just mention one or two of the earlier employees of the company. There was Jack Ellis, who until his death recently had been running the Industrial Truck and Equipment Company at Woodville. This is now run by his son Stanley. Jack was a very loyal employee and sales manager from 1932 until 1939. And then there was Perth Chapman. Perth Chapman started with us in the middle of the Depression. He'd been with Harold Martin, who couldn't keep him on any longer. And I said to Perce, well, Perce, I can give you 3 weeks' work, but I won't promise anything further. I don't know how many years he was there afterwards, and he was foreman of the shop. He had his 25-year watch, so you can imagine how long he was with us. And then there was another brilliant young man, Tom Ellis. Oh, wonderful apprentice and wonderful mechanic. He also was foreman of the shop, but unfortunately Tom died when he was only 28 years of age, too young for a brilliant young man. And then there was another little apprentice too. By gee, he proved himself in the technical side of things. Oh, he's a real good technical bloke. Now he's the assistant service manager, in Reg Harvey. And then there was Jack Ween. Well, Jack Ween was an apprentice with us, and then a motor mechanic. And then he joined the army during the Second World War and rose to be a major, and in the motor transport division. After coming back, he was with us for a while, and he went to Murdoch's, and he went to in his own dealership at Robe, and then to Manham. But he died only a few years ago, having had 2 lots of hepatitis. Then there was a young chappie in the spare parts department. Afterwards took charge of it, and later he took the management of the Blue Peter service station, the used car department in that section. Now our sales manager, Doug Pollard. I've just mentioned a few of these earlier fellows. All these top executives and fellows you know today, well, you know their histories. I've just mentioned a few of the fellows that some of you don't even know. Continuing the company's history, we were made direct dealers of General Motors in somewhere in about 1953, and since then we have never looked back. We've continued to expand in every direction in sales and service. We've added continually to our properties, the new used car yard up on Commercial Road, Blue Peter service station, Riverport, and the big division in Lipson Street. This also a used car yard at Woodville. Volume is always. We were doing something like 40 new vehicles a month when I handed over to Max, and now they're handling over 100 vehicles a month. And of course the staff has increased out of all knowledge as executives and staff and employees, numbering up to 170 to 180 persons. I think this just about gives a fair idea of the early history of the company, and I'll just cut out now.